She had been standing in his life for 6 years, at every birthday party, every school recital, every 2 a.m. crisis when his daughter ran a fever and he didn't know what to do. 6 years of inside jokes and grocery runs and quiet evenings on his porch. 6 years. And Logan Hayes never once thought to ask himself why a woman worth $2 billion kept showing up at his door. He was about to find out. And when the truth came out, in the middle of a crowded airport, with his 8-year-old daughter clutching a hand-drawn picture, it would change everything he thought he knew about friendship, about love, and about the family he had already built without realizing it. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far it travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button before we begin. This is their story. The antique market on Callaway Street was the kind of place that swallowed Saturday mornings whole. It stretched 3 full city blocks under a patchwork of canvas awnings, crammed with folding tables and rusted shelves and vendors who hadn't dusted their inventory since sometime in the previous decade. It smelled like cedar and motor oil, and for reasons nobody could explain, faintly of cinnamon. By 11 o'clock, the crowd was thick enough that Logan Hayes had already lost his daughter twice. Once to a display of vintage tin robots, and once to a woman selling handmade bracelets who had called Lily the most serious little customer I've ever had. Lily was 8. She had her father's brown eyes and her late mother's stubborn jaw, and she approached every purchase with the gravity of someone signing a treaty. She was currently standing in front of a table stacked with old brass compasses, holding one up to the light with the focused expression of a gemologist examining a stone. "Dad." She didn't look up. "This one's broken." "Yeah, baby, most of them are." "Then why do people buy them?" Logan crouched beside her, hands on his knees, and considered this. "Because they're pretty. Because they remind people of something. Because sometimes a broken thing still has value." Lily thought about this for a moment, turned the compass over in her small hands, and then set it down with a kind of careful finality. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not buying a broken one." "Fair." He stood and turned and nearly walked directly into Ava Sinclair. She was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and wearing a green linen jacket over dark jeans, her black hair pulled back in a loose knot that was already starting to come apart at the sides. She had a small smear of what looked like powdered sugar near her left wrist, which meant she'd already found the beignet cart at the south end of the market, which also meant she'd been here for at least 20 minutes before finding them, which was very Ava. She liked to do a full lap before committing to a direction. She held out one of the cups without saying anything. Logan took it. "You got here early." "I got here on time. You were late. We had a compass situation." "I can see that." She looked down at Lily. "Did you find a good one?" Lily shook her head solemnly. "They're all broken." "Ah." Ava crouched to Lily's level without hesitation, without the performance of it, the way some adults did when they talked to children, that exaggerated crouch and widened eyes. She just got down there, natural as anything, and looked at the table with the same seriousness Lily was bringing to it. "What about that one? The copper one in the back?" Lily squinted. "It's scratched." "Scratched isn't the same as broken." A pause. Lily reached for the copper compass, examined it, worked the hinge. The needle swung and settled. She looked at Ava. Ava waited. $8, the vendor said from behind the table, a heavy-set man in a Carhartt vest who'd been watching this whole transaction with mild amusement. Lily looked at Logan. Logan looked at his wallet. "Fine," he said. They moved through the market slowly, the 3 of them spread in a loose formation with Lily ranging ahead and doubling back, the way she always did in public spaces. Some internal radius she maintained around her father that she'd never consciously articulate but had never broken since the summer she was 4, and he'd spent 40 terrifying minutes looking for her in a department store. Logan and Ava walked side by side, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, far enough that neither of them noticed it anymore. "She's getting tall," Ava said. "Don't say that." "She is, though. I know she is. I just don't like to think about it." He sipped his coffee. "She asked me last week when she could get a phone." "What did you say?" "I said when she was 40. Ava smiled, the small private kind that happened before she decided whether something was actually funny. And how did that land? Surprisingly well. She said, "Okay, but can we negotiate?" I don't know where she learned to say that. I may have used that word in front of her once or twice. Yeah, I figured. They passed a table of old vinyl records. Logan slowed without quite stopping, the way he always did near music, and Ava noticed the way she always noticed things about him, quietly, peripherally, without making a production of it. "You're not buying anything," she said. "I'm looking." "You always say that. And I'm always right. I never buy anything." "Because you can't decide." "Because I respect the process." He picked up an album, glanced at the cover, set it back. "There's no rush." Ava said nothing. There was something in his voice when he talked about things like this. Records, old maps, the particular quality of light on a winter afternoon, that had always struck her as one of the more quietly devastating things about him. The way he noticed beauty without needing to own it. She had met 100 men who would have bought every record on that table just to have something to point at and say, "That's mine." Logan would stand here for 10 minutes and leave with nothing and carry the memory of it for years. She had loved that about him before she'd understood that she was in love with him. She looked away from him. She looked at Lily, who was 30 feet ahead, crouched in front of a crate of old photographs, sorting through them with the compass in her other hand. "Keep it together," Ava told herself. "It's a Saturday. It's fine." The stranger's table was near the center of the market, tucked between a furniture restorer and a woman selling hand-poured candles. It was a furniture table, mostly chairs, a mirror with a gilded frame, a set of end tables that had been painted and repainted so many times, the wood underneath was more memory than material. Behind the table stood an older man with white eyebrows and the kind of easy warmth that came from 40 years of talking to strangers at markets like this one. His name, according to the hand-lettered sign at the edge of the table, was Bernard. Lily spotted the mirror first, not because she wanted it, because she wanted to see herself in it. She walked up and stood in front of it, holding the compass at arm's length to watch the needle, and Bernard looked down at her with a grandfatherly smile and said, "That's a nice compass you've got." "Thank you," Lily said. "It's scratched, but it's not broken. That's the best kind." Logan and Ava arrived at the table a moment later. Bernard glanced up at them, then back at Lily, then at them again, and his face did the thing that faces did. The small realignment that happened when a person assembled pieces into a picture. "Your daughter's got good taste," he said. Logan started to say thank you, which was the automatic response, the default. It was what he always said when people said things like that about Lily. It had been his reflex for years. But then from somewhere nearby, from a woman examining a candlestick to their left, from the general conversational blur of a crowded market, someone asked a question. Something about the end table, something about the price. And Bernard glanced over, distracted, and said, "Go ahead, take a look." And asked the missus, "She'll have an opinion." He said it reflexively. He said it because there was a man and a woman standing together at his table and a child between them. And the pattern was the pattern. And Bernard was a man who had been running a market table for decades and had stopped overthinking small courtesies sometime around 2004. Ask the missus. Logan laughed. He laughed the way you laugh at something small and harmless, at the minor comedy of a misunderstanding, at the gentle absurdity of being mistaken for something you're not. He laughed and looked at the end table and said, without really thinking about it, in that easy and unguarded way he had when he was comfortable, "My wife always gets the final say." The woman examining the candlestick laughed. The man standing behind her laughed. A teenager 2 tables down who hadn't even been listening to the conversation somehow absorbed enough of it to smirk. The laughter was brief and light, the way laughter at small coincidences always was, present for 3 seconds and then dissolving back into the noise of the market. Logan was already turning to look at the end table. He was already extending his hand toward the surface of it, knocking lightly on the wood the way his own father had done whenever they looked at furniture together. Some inherited gesture he'd absorbed without knowing it. He wasn't looking at Ava. If he had been looking at Ava, he would have seen something he had never seen before. She didn't laugh. That was the thing. That was the small and devastating thing that shouldn't have mattered and did. Everyone around them laughed. and Ava Sinclair, who had closed a $200 million acquisition while sitting in traffic, who had walked into a boardroom of 40 skeptical investors at 26 years old and walked out with everything she'd asked for, who had handled every crisis and every complication and every unexpected turn with the particular brand of precise and unshakable composure that had made her what she was. Ava. Sinclair went very still. It lasted only a moment, long enough for the laughter to pass, long enough for Logan to finish knocking on the end table and turn back. And when he turned back, Ava was already smiling. But it was a different smile than the one she'd been wearing 5 minutes ago. It was the smile she kept in reserve, the one she brought out for press conferences and difficult meetings and situations where the most important thing was that nobody see what was actually happening inside her. Logan had seen this smile maybe 4 or 5 times in 6 years, and he had never known what to call it, only that it was different, only that it appeared at moments when something that seemed small was, in fact, something else entirely. He noticed it. He just didn't know yet what it meant. "I think the table's too dark for your living room," Ava said. Her voice was completely level. "Yeah? The wood's a deep walnut. Your floors are lighter. It would fight." "Huh." He looked at the table again. "You're probably right. I'm always right about these things." "You are," he agreed, and there was affection in it, uncomplicated and easy, and she smiled again, the real smile this time, briefly, like a window opening and closing. And then Lily came back with the compass and asked if they could get lunch because she was dying, which she was not. But 8-year-olds have their own interior scales of suffering and hunger rates very high. They left Bernard's table. They moved through the market. They ate lunch at a taco stand near the north entrance, sitting on a low stone wall with their food in their laps, Lily talking at length about a classmate named Priya who had apparently committed some significant social infraction involving a shared project and a lot of glitter. It was a good afternoon. It was the kind of afternoon Logan had come to think of as a regular thing, as the texture of his normal life, as something he was lucky to have without fully articulating what this was, what Ava in his life on a Saturday actually meant, what the sum of 6 years of Saturdays like this one actually added up to. He still didn't know. But something had shifted, something small and invisible and significant, the way fault lines shift before anyone feels the tremor. The charity event that evening was Ava's world, not Logan's. The Hartwell Foundation Gala was held in the rooftop ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, 40 stories above the city, and it was the kind of event that made Logan feel like he'd borrowed his suit from someone slightly more comfortable in their own skin. The room was full of people he didn't know, talking about things he couldn't always follow, with a specific kind of social fluency he'd never quite developed. The ability to be interesting in short bursts, to hold a drink and maintain eye contact and project the impression that you were exactly where you belonged. Ava had invited him as her +1 3 years running. He'd said yes every time. He'd never quite figured out why she wanted him there, and he'd never asked, and she'd never explained, and somehow that had been fine. Tonight, though, he was watching her differently. He'd been doing it since the market, since that half second at Bernard's table, since the smile that wasn't quite her real smile. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He just kept finding his eyes on her across the room, noting things he'd always known. The way she moved through a crowd without pushing, the way she listened to people with her whole face, the way she laughed at something a city council member said while simultaneously tracking the conversation 3 feet to her left, and noticing them differently, as if they'd been data points he'd been collecting for years without ever running the analysis. She was in a dark blue dress. He had thought, when she came out of her bedroom to leave for the gala, that she looked incredible. He had thought it, and then immediately deflected the thought, filed it somewhere he didn't go. He'd been filing thoughts like that for a while. He was beginning to suspect, without examining any of them too closely. He got a drink at the bar. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked at the city. Behind him, Ava was talking to the foundation's executive director about a grant program for arts education in under-resourced schools, and he could hear her voice, clear, warm, specific in a way that meant she'd actually read the materials. And he thought about what Lily had said once, maybe 2 years ago. Ava knows everything. He'd laughed at the time. He'd said, "Nobody knows everything, baby." And Lily had looked at him with the complete seriousness that was her resting state and said, She knows everything that matters. The storm came in fast. One of those late summer storms that the weather apps had mentioned as a 30% chance, and nobody had taken seriously. And then at 9:15, the lights of the surrounding buildings flickered, and the first real crack of thunder shook the windows of the ballroom, and the event coordinator was on a radio, and within 20 minutes, the gala was wrapping early, cars summoned, guests dispersed, because the elevators in the Meridian were on backup power, and the roof was not a great place to be in a lightning storm. Ava's penthouse was on the 32nd floor of the building next door. A covered pedestrian bridge connected the two towers at the 20th floor, one of those architectural decisions that seemed excessive until it became exactly necessary. And they'd crossed it in 3 minutes, just the two of them, because Ava had sent her driver home at 7, and Logan's car was in the garage below, and neither of them wanted to wait in the lobby for 45 minutes while every car service in the city was occupied. The penthouse was dark when they came in. Ava moved through it with the ease of someone who'd navigated it in the dark before, flipping on a lamp in the living room, then the kitchen overhead, then the smaller standing lamp near the reading chair that she'd moved 3 times in 3 years and still hadn't found the right place for. The city spread out below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, lit and restless, rain beginning to cut sideways across the glass. "Lily's at your mother's?" Ava asked from the kitchen. "Until tomorrow afternoon." He dropped his jacket over the back of the couch, loosened his tie. "She's fine. She likes storms." "She does. She told me once that thunder was the sky being dramatic." Ava turned from the kitchen with a glass of water and a look on her face that was something close to affection. "I've thought about that every storm since." She was 6 when she said that. She was brilliant when she said that. Logan sat on the couch. Ava put on music, something low and piano-heavy, and brought 2 glasses of water and sat in the armchair across from him, and they talked. They talked the way they always talked when it was just the two of them, without the social calibration that other people required, without the performance of casual. They talked about the gala, about a board situation at Ava's company that had been quietly complicated for months, about whether Lily's school was actually the right fit for her, or whether Logan was staying because moving her felt disruptive, and disruption felt like failure. "You're not failing her," Ava said. "I know. Do you?" He looked at her. "Probably not completely." She didn't push it. She never pushed things all the way. She had this quality, he'd noticed it 100 times, of knowing exactly where the line was between useful honesty and unnecessary pain, and stopping just inside it. He had never met anyone else who did that reliably. An hour in, Ava went to get her laptop. She needed to send a message to her CFO before the morning, something she'd been meaning to do since the gala ended, and she asked Logan if he could move the box on the desk to the shelf in the second office. She was reorganizing, and the box was in the way of the power strip. It was a simple thing. He'd done similar things in this apartment dozens of times. Ava trusted him in her space without conditions, had from early on, which was its own kind of significant thing that he'd also never quite examined. He went to the desk. The box was cardboard, closed but not sealed, the kind of medium-sized box that could hold anything: files, equipment, household items. It was heavier than he expected. He adjusted his grip, and when he did, the top shifted. He wasn't trying to look inside. He was just trying to get a better hold on it, and the top shifted, and the first thing he saw was a photograph. He stopped. He looked. It was a photograph of Lily. Lily at, he had to think, at her 6th birthday party, he thought, based on the balloon decorations and the cake with the purple frosting. She was sitting at the head of the table in the little paper crown he'd made for her because he'd forgotten to buy a real one, the one she'd refused to take off for 3 days after the party, and she was laughing at something off camera, that completely unself-conscious laugh she had, the one that involved her whole face and a certain amount of snorting. Logan stood there for a moment. Then he set the box down on the desk and looked at the top again. Properly this time. Photographs. Not one. Not a couple. An entire collection, loosely organized, some of them tucked into small sleeves, some of them just resting flat in the box, some of them printed on regular paper, and some of them actual prints. A school recital. He knew this one. He'd been there. It was the winter show the year Lily was 7. And Lily was on stage in the back row of the chorus wearing a silver star on her headband, not quite making the right movements for the song, but very committed to the general spirit of it. A camping trip. The one he and Lily had taken to Sutter Lake 3 summers ago, with the tent that had collapsed twice in the night, and the raccoon that had gotten into their food, and the morning when Lily had stood at the edge of the water in her rubber boots and said that she thought she understood why people liked nature, even though she personally preferred indoors. Ava hadn't been on that camping trip. He stared at the photograph. It was taken from a distance, through trees, him and Lily at the water's edge, the kind of shot where the subject doesn't know they're being photographed. He was crouched beside his daughter, pointing at something in the water. He had no memory of the moment specifically. It was one of 1,000 moments from that weekend. But whoever had taken the photograph had framed it carefully, had waited for the right angle of light, had thought about what they were capturing. He went through the box slowly. A drawing Lily had made at 7. He recognized it. She'd gone through a phase of drawing elaborate underwater scenes, folded and unfolded enough times that the creases had started to soften into the paper. A ticket stub from Lily's first movie at the actual cinema, which he'd gone to with Ava, and which Lily had not made it through because she'd fallen asleep on Ava's shoulder 20 minutes in. A note in Lily's handwriting, big, careful, the early print handwriting of a child who was still learning that letters had to be consistent, that said, "Thank you for the book, Ava. It was the best one." He didn't know which book. There had been many books. He was standing there with the note in his hand when Ava came back into the room. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. She looked at the box. She looked at the photograph in his hand. Something happened in her face that he didn't have a word for. It wasn't panic. It wasn't quite shame. It was the specific look of a person who has been carrying something carefully for a very long time and has just watched it drop. "Logan, how long?" His voice came out strange, not accusing, not warm, just stripped down, just honest. "How long have you been keeping these?" She didn't answer right away. The rain was loud against the windows. The music was still playing, something quiet in another room. "The camping trip one is from 3 years ago," he said. "Lily was 5 in the birthday photo. That's almost 3 years," Ava said. He looked at her. She came into the room slowly and stopped on the other side of the desk. She looked at her hands for a moment, then looked at him, and he could see that she'd made a decision. The kind of decision that had probably been building for a long time and had just had the timing chosen for it by circumstance rather than by choice. "I didn't plan to tell you," she said, "tonight or any time. I had a plan, which was to keep things the way they are, because the way they are is good, and it works, and I don't want to ruin it." "Ava." "I know," she exhaled. I know that's not a full answer." "What is the full answer?" The lightning outside was close. The light of it came through the windows in a bright flat sheet, and then was gone. Ava said, "I'm in love with you." She said it simply. Not the way you say something you've been building up to, all the accumulated pressure of it making the delivery too big, too much. She said it the way you say something you've just accepted the truth of, with a kind of tired and uncomplicated clarity. "I'm in love with you, and I have been for about 2 years, and I have been very careful and very deliberate about not letting you know that. And I was planning to continue being careful and deliberate for as long as necessary because you are the most important person in my life. And I would 1,000 times rather have you as my best friend than lose you trying to be something else." She stopped. Logan hadn't moved. "And I know," she continued, quieter, "that this is probably going to be... I know this is a thing that changes the way you look at everything we've had, and I'm sorry about that. I am genuinely sorry. I've been careful not to..." "You were at the camping trip," Logan said. She blinked. "What?" "The photograph. You weren't there. You were at a conference that weekend. You said your colleagues sent you updates. I remember." He held up the photograph. "Who took this?" A pause. "I drove up on Sunday morning, the last day. You and Lily were up before me and you went down to the water and I just wanted to see it. I drove back before you knew I was there." He looked at her. "I know," she said quickly. "I know how that sounds. That's 3 hours of driving." "Yes." "Each way." "Yes." You drove 6 hours to stand in the trees and watch us at a lake for 20 minutes and then drive home. Yes. The rain, the music, the city below them, lit and indifferent. Ava, he said. I know, I know. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose, the gesture she made when she was trying to hold herself together and didn't entirely trust the process. I want to be clear that I don't expect anything. I'm not telling you this to start something. I'm telling you because I got caught and I think you deserve the truth more than I deserve the comfort of you not knowing it. That's very logical. I'm a logical person. You're a person who drove 6 hours to stand in the woods. I'm aware of the contradiction. Logan set the photograph down on the desk. He set the note down beside it. He looked at the box for a moment, this cardboard box full of his life and his daughter's life, carefully collected and quietly kept, and he felt something he couldn't fully name, some complicated convergence of things that hadn't yet resolved into a single emotion. I don't know what to do with this, he said finally. You don't have to do anything with it. Her voice was steady. It was impressive how steady her voice was. I'm not asking you for anything, Logan. I meant it. What I have with you and with Lily is the best thing in my life. I'm not going to blow that up because I have feelings I should have sorted out on my own. And if I need time to think about it, she met his eyes. Then you take the time you need, and I'll still be here. He nodded slowly. The storm moved and the lightning was further away now, the thunder arriving later, the gap between them widening, the city settling back into the ordinary dark. He didn't stay much longer after that. He found his jacket and his tie and his car keys, and he said goodnight, and she walked him to the door. And when he left, he didn't quite know what to say, and neither did she. And so he left without resolving anything. He drove home in the rain. He sat in his car in front of his house for a long time after he turned off the engine, the rain going quiet on the roof, the neighborhood dark and still around him. He thought about 6 years. He thought about Saturdays. He thought about the way she had handed him the coffee that morning at the market without saying anything, because she already knew how he took it, had known for years. He thought about the school recital photograph in the box, and the birthday party photograph, and the camping trip photograph, and the note in Lily's careful early handwriting. Thank you for the book, Ava. It was the best one. He thought about the smile at Bernard's table, the one that wasn't quite her real smile, the one that happened for half a second when a stranger had said a harmless and random thing that turned out to be in some way neither of them had been ready for, not harmless and not random at all. He sat in his car. He thought. Outside, the rain slowed and stopped and the street filled up with the particular silence that comes after a storm, when the world is wet and still and everything is a few degrees clearer than it was before. He didn't have an answer yet, but he was for the first time asking the right questions. He didn't sleep. That was the honest version of the night, not the version where a man lies in his quiet house and thinks things through with clarity and arrives at some organized understanding of his own feelings, but the real version, which was Logan Hayes lying on top of his covers in the dark at 2 a.m, still wearing his dress shirt, one shoe on and one shoe off, staring at the ceiling with the particular kind of wakefulness that has nothing to do with not being tired. He was tired. He was exhausted. He'd been on his feet since 7 that morning, and he'd been carrying the weight of the last few hours since roughly 9:15, and his body had every reason to shut down and didn't. His brain kept going back to the box, not to what Ava had said, or not only to that, to the box itself, to the photographs, to the camping trip picture specifically, the one taken through the trees, him and Lily at the water's edge in the early morning light. He kept thinking about her driving up there. 3 hours of highway on a Sunday morning, which meant she'd left the city before 6, which meant she'd set an alarm, which meant she'd decided to do it the night before. She hadn't just acted on an impulse. She'd planned it. She'd packed herself into a car in the dark and driven to a lake to stand in the trees and watch them. And then she'd driven home before they knew she'd been there. And she'd taken a photograph first because she'd wanted to keep something of it. He thought about what kind of feeling made you do that. He thought about it for a long time. At some point he must have slept because the next thing he was aware of was the alarm on his phone at 7:30 and the gray thin light coming through the curtains and the specific confusion of waking up with your shoes on when you don't remember deciding to sleep. He showered. He made coffee. He stood in his kitchen in the silence that Lily's absence made, different from regular silence, more noticeable, the way a missing piece in a familiar pattern is always more visible than the piece itself. And he drank his coffee and tried to locate what he was actually feeling underneath all the noise. What he found, when he was honest about it, was not what he expected. He expected confusion. He had some of that. He expected a kind of retroactive disorientation, the feeling of having the context of 6 years suddenly and significantly reframed, of looking back at 1,000 ordinary moments and understanding that they'd been carrying more weight than he'd realized. He had that too. But underneath those things, in the quieter place where he didn't usually let himself look, was something he hadn't anticipated. Relief. He sat with that for a while. He didn't trust it completely. Relief seemed like the wrong word, or at least an incomplete one, and he wasn't prepared yet to examine what it was relieving him of, or what that meant. But it was there, undeniable and specific, and he thought it deserved honesty even if he wasn't ready to do anything with it. He called his mother at 8. "Lily's fine," his mother said before he could ask. "She slept through the storm. She's eating toast. She wants to know if she can keep the compass in her room, or if it has to go in the living room with the other things." "Her room," Logan said. "That's what I told her." A pause. In the background, he could hear the small sounds of his mother's kitchen, the particular acoustics of a house he'd grown up in. "You sound like you didn't sleep." "I slept." "Logan, I slept some. What happened?" He thought about how to answer that. "Something I need to think through," he said. His mother was quiet for a moment, the way she was when she was deciding whether to push. "Does it involve Ava?" The question landed somewhere soft. He didn't answer right away, and the pause itself was an answer, and his mother, who had known him for 32 years and had watched him miss things about himself with a patience that occasionally bordered on frustration, made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement and might have been something else entirely. "Take your time," she said. "Lily's fine here until the afternoon." He spent the morning at the house. He fixed a cabinet hinge in the kitchen that had been loose for 2 weeks. He went through Lily's backpack and found a permission slip for a field trip that had a due date of 4 days ago. He signed it anyway and put it on the counter with a note to himself to email the teacher. And a drawing she'd made at school of what appeared to be a family of otters at a birthday party, which he put on the refrigerator because it was genuinely excellent. He pulled 2 loads of laundry through the machine and folded them badly on the couch and left them there because folding laundry badly on the couch was a system that worked well enough. He did not call Ava. He wasn't avoiding her exactly. He was giving himself the morning to figure out what he actually thought before he said anything, which seemed like the responsible approach. The last time he'd spoken without thinking first, the thing at Bernard's table, the casual and unconsidered "my wife always gets the final say," he was still reckoning with the consequences of that. Not that he'd done something wrong, he just didn't want to be unconsidered again about something that deserved consideration. Around noon, he went out to the backyard and sat on the back steps, the ones that needed repainting, the ones Ava had helped him sand down the previous spring on a Saturday afternoon when Lily was at a birthday party and there was nothing particular to do. He remembered that day clearly now. Ava in old clothes with a dust mask pushed up on her forehead, telling him he was sanding against the grain, him saying he wasn't, both of them checking and him being wrong. Lily coming home to find them sitting on the steps drinking lemonade with sawdust on their clothes and saying, "Did you actually finish or did you just stop?" The answer had been that they'd just stopped. They'd gotten tired and they'd talked too much and they'd run out of afternoon, and so they'd just stopped. And the steps still needed 2 more passes with the fine grit paper, and somehow that had never gotten done. He looked at the grain of the wood. He thought about all the Saturdays, not in a sentimental way, not in the way that turns memory into something curated and clean. In the real way, the way where you look at an accumulation of ordinary time and understand that ordinary is exactly what makes it mean something. Ava showing up to Lily's school play because he'd mentioned it twice, because she'd put it in her calendar, because she'd rearranged a meeting to make it work and hadn't told him that part until Lily asked her directly at dinner afterward, "Did you have to do anything special to come?" And Ava had said, carefully, I had to move a few things around, which was true in the way that the storm was a bit rough, is technically true about a Category 4 hurricane. He'd known she rearranged things. He'd been grateful for it. He'd said thank you. He'd thought of it as the kind of thing a good friend did. He was starting to understand now that there was a category of thing you did for a friend and a category of thing you did for something else, and that the line between them was something he'd been standing exactly on for a long time without knowing it. Dot. He picked up Lily at 2. She came out of his mother's house with the compass in one hand and a paperback book in the other, and her hair in a braid that had mostly come apart, talking at him from the end of the driveway before she'd even reached the car. Grandma showed me how to use a compass for real, and mine actually works, even though it's scratched, and I found north 17 times and I was right every time except once, but Grandma said that one might have been because of the refrigerator. The refrigerator? Metal messes up compasses, she knew that. Lily got in the car, dropped her book on the seat, examined the compass. I think I want to learn navigation, like sailing, like hiking, but also maybe sailing. Does navigation include sailing? Navigation covers pretty much everything. She considered this with satisfaction. Good. I want to cover everything. He drove. Lily sat in the back and read her book and periodically reported information from it to him, the way she did when she was reading something that kept surprising her. Quick verbal annotations, like she was keeping him updated on a situation developing in real time. After a few miles, she put the book down. Is Ava coming over this week? The question was casual. Lily asked it the way she asked about groceries or weather, practical, logistical, organizing her week in her head. I'm not sure, Logan said. I want to show her the compass. You can text her. I know I can text her. I want to show her in person. There's a difference. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily had picked up the book again, apparently satisfied with this conversation. She was 8. She had no idea she was asking a question that had approximately 900 sub-questions nested underneath it, each of which her father was currently failing to answer. I'll figure it out, he said. Okay, she said, and turned a page. He texted Ava on Tuesday. 3 days after the gala, 3 days after the box, 3 days of the silence that had settled between them, like something that needed to be addressed before it calcified. He'd thought about calling, but calling felt like a pressure, like an event, and he didn't want the conversation to feel like an event. He wanted it to feel like two people who knew each other well being honest with each other, which they'd always been good at, which was maybe the most important thing about them that still held. Hey, I'd like to talk. No pressure on timing, whenever works for you. She replied in 4 minutes. Tomorrow evening. I'll bring dinner. Then a moment later, unless you want to pick the place. We don't have to do it at your house. He wrote back, the house is fine. Lily wants to show you the compass anyway. A longer pause this time. Then, okay, just that. Just okay. But there was something in the brevity of it, or he read something into it, which might not have been the same thing, that felt like she was exhaling for the first time in 3 days, too. She came at 6 on Wednesday. She brought Thai food from the place on Mercer Street, which was Lily's favorite, which was either a thoughtful choice or a strategic one, and was probably both. She was in jeans and a gray pullover, her hair down, and she looked tired in a way she wouldn't show to most people, but that Logan could see because he'd spent 6 years learning all the frequencies of her. Lily was at the door before she knocked. How did you... Ava started. I heard your car, Lily said. She held up the compass. North. Ava looked at the compass. She looked at Lily. Something in her face went soft and then steadied again. That's perfect, she said. That's exactly the right one. They ate dinner at the kitchen table the way they always did, Lily talking with enough energy for 3 people, covering the compass navigation situation, the field trip permission slip, the ongoing issue with her classmate Priya, a hypothesis she had about why some dogs were obviously smarter than their owners. Ava listened and asked questions and ate her dinner, and the conversation had all the texture of normal, of the hundreds of dinners that had come before it, and Logan sat across from them both and felt the strange and specific vertigo of seeing something familiar from a new angle. After dinner, Lily was sent to the bath with the compass left in the kitchen for safekeeping. The sounds of the house settled into the kind of domestic background noise that meant everything was temporarily fine. Water running, Lily talking to herself the way she did when she was alone, the occasional small thud of her testing whether rubber duck physics had changed since last time. Logan washed the containers. Ava dried them. Side by side at the sink, not quite touching, the kitchen lit warm. "I'm not going to pretend the other night didn't happen," Logan said. "I wasn't going to ask you to." "I needed a few days." "I know. I'm glad you texted." He turned off the water. He dried his hands on the dish towel that Lily had decided 3 years ago should be exclusively the one with the ducks on it, a policy that had never been officially voted on, but had somehow become law. He turned to look at Ava, who was stacking the last container and not quite looking at him. "Can I ask you something?" She met his eyes. "Yes." "When did you actually know? Not the feeling building up. When did you know for certain?" She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything serious, not performing consideration, actually doing it. "Lily's 7th birthday," she said finally. "The outdoor party. You'd set up that ridiculous number of streamers, and you'd been up until midnight the night before making the banner, and you dropped the cake coming out of the kitchen. You remember that?" He did. He remembered it exactly. The vanilla cake with the purple frosting that he'd spent an hour and 40 minutes making from scratch because Lily had specified purple frosting in a way that ruled out store-bought, and which had come off the counter wrong when he was carrying it out, and had hit the floor mostly intact but definitely broken, and he'd stood there for 1 full second looking at it, and then just sat down on the kitchen floor next to the ruined cake and started laughing. "You sat on the floor, Ava said. "And Lily came running in because she heard the crash, and she looked at you, and she looked at the cake, and she just sat down next to you. She didn't cry. She just sat with you. And you were both sitting on the kitchen floor laughing at the broken cake, and I was standing in the doorway, and—" She stopped, and I thought, whatever that is, that's what I want. Not the cake, not the party, not any of the external thing, just that. The two of you sitting on the floor. Logan was quiet. "It was a completely inconvenient time to figure that out," Ava added. "Yeah. I want you to know that I spent the next 2 years very competently not making it your problem." "I know." He looked at her. "I see that now. I see how much of it was how careful you were being. I was trying to protect what we had. I know you were." She turned away slightly toward the window over the sink, the dark backyard beyond the glass. "I'm still trying to protect it, Logan. That hasn't changed. Whatever you figure out about how you feel, I'm not going anywhere. We don't have to. I don't need this to become something it isn't yet. I meant that." He thought about what he'd felt sitting in his car in the rain 3 nights ago. He thought about the word relief and what it was actually pointing at. He thought about 6 years of Saturdays and school plays and antique markets and kitchen floors. He thought about the fact that when things went wrong, the small things and the big things, Lily's fevers and the workdays that went sideways, and the times when he wasn't sure he was handling any of it correctly, his first instinct, always, without thinking about it, was to call Ava. Not because she had answers. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she just sat with the problem alongside him, which was its own thing, maybe the most important thing. He thought about what his mother had said on the phone Sunday morning. Not the words, but the silence after the words. That particular maternal silence that was not empty, but full of 40 years of watching her son walk past things that were standing right in front of him. "I don't know what I feel yet," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I don't want to say something I don't fully mean." "That's fair. But I know that the last 3 days without talking to you felt wrong. Not uncomfortable, just structurally wrong. Like something was missing from the load-bearing part." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression that she didn't try to hide and didn't try to expand on. "Okay," she said quietly. "That's not a declaration. I know it's not. I'm not treating it like one." She turned back to the sink, straightened the dish towel with the ducks on it. "I'm just glad you're talking to me. I'm always going to talk to you." "I know," she said. "I'm glad about it anyway." Lily came out of the bathroom 20 minutes later in her pajamas, trailing the smell of shampoo and carrying the compass again despite specific instructions to leave it in the kitchen. She climbed onto the couch and wedged herself between them in the specific way she had of occupying exactly as much space as she needed, which was all of it. She put the compass on the cushion beside her. She picked up the book Ava had brought last month and was still reading, the one about a girl who circumnavigated the world in a boat. And she read 3 pages and then fell asleep mid-sentence, the compass still on the cushion next to her, needle pointing north. Logan looked at Ava over the top of Lily's head. Ava looked at him. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying right then, in that specific moment. The house was warm and the lamp was on, and outside the city went about its ordinary business, and none of it had been resolved. Not really, not yet. But it was also true that Ava was here, on this couch, in this house, where she had always been. Logan reached over and moved the compass off the cushion so it wouldn't get sat on or stepped on when Lily shifted in the night. He set it carefully on the end table where it would be safe. That was all. That was the whole gesture. But Ava saw him do it, and she said nothing, and she didn't have to. The evening moved the way evenings did when no one was trying to make them into something. Slowly and without drama, and with the particular warmth of 2 people who had found their way back to the same room after a few days of the room being wrong without it. Nothing was decided. Nothing was promised. But something that had been held at a distance for years had moved, quietly and without announcement, a few degrees closer to where it had always been trying to go. Lily slept on between them. The compass sat on the end table. The city went on outside. And for the first time since Sunday morning, Logan didn't feel like he was sitting on the outside of his own life looking in. The weeks after the Wednesday dinner were careful ones. Not cold, not distant, careful. There was a difference, and both of them understood it without discussing it. Logan was working something out in himself, and Ava knew it, and she gave him the space to do it without making the space feel like a withdrawal. They texted the way they always had. Ava came to the house on a Thursday evening when Logan had a work deadline and Lily needed help with a school project involving a diorama of a rainforest ecosystem, which Ava approached with the same methodical seriousness she brought to quarterly earnings calls. Logan heard them from the office. Lily's voice explaining the structural requirements of the canopy layer, Ava's voice asking whether the jaguar was meant to be in the tree or on the ground, Lily saying it could go either way depending on what looked better, Ava saying that was a very mature artistic philosophy. He sat at his desk and stared at his laptop and got almost nothing done. The thing was, he knew what he felt. He'd known since the car on Sunday night, since the specific word relief had surfaced and refused to go away. He knew the way you know things you've been not knowing deliberately, the way a door you've been walking past for years turns out to have been unlocked the whole time. He just hadn't decided yet what to do about knowing it. There was fear in it, not of Ava, not of what she'd said, but of his own history, of the particular shape his life had taken since Lily's mother left when Lily was 2, 6 years of building something stable and functional and good, and the specific terror that wanting more than that was how you broke what you already had. He'd broken things before by wanting the wrong things. He had a detailed personal history of it, so he was careful, and Ava was careful alongside him, and they were both, in their different ways, waiting for something to shift. What shifted it was not anything Logan did. What shifted it was Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale was 34, technically handsome in a way that required a great deal of maintenance, and the kind of man who moved through any room as though he had already been told he was the most important person in it. He ran a private equity firm with offices in 4 cities, and a particular reputation for acquiring companies at distressed prices and restructuring them into something leaner, which in practice meant he was very good at the specific art of finding things other people had built and making them profitable by removing everything that made them worth building in the first place. Logan did not know any of this on the Friday evening he ran into Marcus Hale at the wine bar on Clement Street, where he'd agreed to meet 2 colleagues for what was supposed to be a quick drink after work. What he knew on that Friday evening was that Ava was sitting at a corner table with a man he'd never seen before, and that the man was leaning toward her in the particular way men lean toward women they were trying to impress, and that Ava had a glass of white wine she wasn't drinking, and the careful, composed expression she wore when she was being politely patient with someone. Logan registered all of this in about 4 seconds from the entrance of the bar. He registered it, and then he registered what he felt about it, and what he felt about it was not nothing. He found his colleagues at the bar. He had a drink. He kept his back to the corner table, mostly, with occasional lapses that he made no attempt to morally justify. At some point, Ava looked up and saw him. He saw her see him. The small recognition, the brief recalibration. She raised one hand in a short wave. He nodded back. He turned around. 15 minutes later, she appeared at his elbow. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "Same." Collins picked the place. He nodded toward his colleagues. Who were you with?" "Marcus Hale. He's been trying to get a meeting with me for about 6 months, and my assistant finally ran out of ways to reschedule without being rude." She picked up Logan's drink, looked at it, put it back. "He wants to discuss a potential acquisition." He seemed very interested in the potential acquisition. Ava looked at him for a moment. There was something in his voice that he hadn't meant to put there, or hadn't meant to make audible. Her expression shifted into something that wasn't quite amusement, and wasn't quite anything else, something that held very still and paid close attention. "He's not my type," she said. "I didn't say anything." "You had a very specific tone." "I was making an observation." "Logan, I don't have a tone." "You absolutely have a tone." She was quiet for a second. The bar noise filled the space between them. "Are you jealous?" He looked at his glass. He looked at the bar. He thought about the responsible and considered approach to this question, the one that involved taking time and being careful and not saying things he hadn't fully worked through yet. "Maybe a little," he said. Ava said nothing. When he looked at her, she was looking at the mirror behind the bar with an expression he couldn't immediately classify. And then she looked at her own hands, and then she looked at him. And there was something in her eyes that was very close to hope, and also very close to the thing that was afraid of hope. "Okay," she said softly. "That's not—" He stopped. "I'm still working through things. I want to be honest about that." "I know. I don't want to say something incomplete and have you—" "Logan, I understand." She turned back toward the corner table. "I should go back. He's going to want a decision on the meeting." She paused. "For what it's worth, he's also not interesting enough for me to bother being dishonest about the acquisition. I'm going to say no. You don't have to do that on my— I'm not doing it on your account. I'm doing it because I've read 3 of his restructuring deals, and he turns profitable companies into stripped assets in under 2 years, and I don't like what it says about a person." She picked up a cocktail napkin from the bar, set it back down. "I just thought you should know the context." She went back to her table. Logan watched Marcus Hale's face when she sat down, the practiced smile, the renewed lean, and he watched Ava's face, which was pleasant and entirely closed, and he thought about a conversation they'd had maybe a year ago, on his porch, when he'd asked her why she didn't date more, why she seemed to screen everyone out before they got close enough to matter. She'd said, "I have high standards." He'd said, "For what?" And she'd said, "For how someone pays attention." He hadn't understood it then. He thought he understood it now. He called her on Sunday. Not a text, a call, because he'd decided that the things he needed to say deserved the kind of conversation where you could hear the other person breathing. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi." "Hi." He was in the backyard. Lily was inside watching a nature documentary with a bowl of popcorn, which she treated as the same category of event as a cinema, full attention and no talking. "I've been thinking." "Okay." "About what you said. About what I said Friday. About all of it." He sat on the back steps, the unpainted ones, the ones from the afternoon last spring with the sawdust and the lemonade. "I keep trying to do this the right way, the careful way, and I think the careful way is making it worse." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know what I feel, and I keep waiting to know it more completely, or more certainly, or whatever the standard is that I've set for myself, and I think that standard might be—" He stopped. "I think I've been careful for a long time because careful was how you kept things from falling apart. And somewhere in there careful became the default, even when I wasn't in danger of losing anything." She was quiet on the other end. "I'm not saying I have everything figured out," he continued. "I'm genuinely not. But I know that when I saw you at that table on Friday, I felt something I didn't have any confusion about at all, And then I made it complicated after the fact, and I think that's the thing I need to stop doing. Logan, she said, and her voice was different, lower, careful in a different way than his careful, like someone who was trying very hard not to move too fast toward something they wanted. I need you to be sure. Not for my sake, for yours and Lily's. I can wait. I've been waiting. I'm just asking you to be sure. I'm working on it. I know. I will tell you when I'm there. Okay? She said, then quieter. Thank you for calling. You sound surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm just... A pause. Glad. They talked for another hour about nothing specific, drifting through the ordinary territories of their friendship the way they always had. And it was different now, and also exactly the same. And Logan sat on his back steps as the sky went dark and thought that this was maybe the truest thing about the two of them. That even with everything now named and present between them, they still sounded like people who simply liked being on the phone with each other. It seemed like a good sign. He just didn't know yet that by the following Thursday, everything would come apart. The email arrived on a Tuesday. Ava's assistant forwarded it to her at 7 in the morning, flagged as high priority, with a note that said the board had already received copies. Logan didn't know about the email on Tuesday. He didn't know about it on Wednesday either. He found out about what it contained on Thursday morning. From a brief item in a business news alert he didn't usually read, but happened to open while drinking his coffee before Lily woke up. Sinclair Group names CEO Ava. Sinclair to head 3-year Southeast Asia expansion. Singapore office to launch Q1 next year. Sinclair to relocate. He read it twice. He put his phone down. He picked it up again. He read it again. The article was 4 paragraphs and didn't tell him anything beyond what the headline had already told him, which was that Ava was moving to Singapore for 3 years, and he had found out from a news alert like a stranger. He called her. She picked up immediately, which meant she'd been waiting for the call, which meant she'd known he would see it, and had been sitting with the phone. "When did you decide this?" he asked. A pause. Last week. Last week. He was standing in his kitchen. He didn't remember standing up. "You decided last week and you didn't tell me." "I was going to tell you. I just needed to..." "Ava." I know, Logan. I'm sorry. I needed a few days to think through how to say it, and then the board announcement moved faster than I expected, and Why are you going?" The question came out more direct than he'd intended, with more weight in it than he'd planned to put there. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he thought the call might have dropped. Then, "Because I think I need to." "That's not an answer." "Logan, you told me 2 weeks ago that you're in love with me, and now you're moving to Singapore for 3 years, and I need you to help me understand how those things are in the same conversation." Another silence. Longer. He heard her exhale. "The night at the gala, after I told you, I went to work the next morning and I sat in my office and I thought about every possible version of how this goes. And one of the versions is that you take some time and you figure out that what you feel is friendship, that you love me the way you've always loved me, and that's what it is, and that's what it will be. And I realize that I don't know how to stay in your life the same way if that's the version that happens. I don't know if I'm capable of it. So you're leaving. I'm choosing something that was already an option. The expansion is real. The board wants it. I've been considering it for 2 years. It's not nothing," he said. "It's 3 years. I know what it is. Lily is 8. In 3 years she'll be 11. The silence that followed was different, heavier, with a different kind of weight. "I know," Ava said, and her voice was fractured in a way he'd almost never heard from her, the precise and controlled composure of Ava Sinclair developing a visible crack. "I know, Logan. Don't do that. I'm not doing anything. I'm telling you what's true. I can't stay in the same place, seeing you every week, watching you figure out whether you want something more with me or whether you don't. I can't just wait in your orbit indefinitely. I'm not..." She stopped, started again. "I'm not built for that. I told you Sunday that I was working on it. I told you I would. Working on it isn't the same as knowing, and I can't make a decision about my life that hinges on whether Logan Hayes works something out." That landed. He felt it land. It was true. He heard the truth in it, and it still hit somewhere sore. So what you're saying, he said slowly, is that you'd rather put 10,000 miles between us than wait another few weeks. I'm saying I'm trying to protect myself. I'm allowed to do that. I know you are. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I know that too. He put his hand against the kitchen counter. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car door closed and then another one. The ordinary sounds of a morning going forward without any awareness of what was happening in this kitchen. When do you leave? He asked. Friday. That's 2 days. The announcement was supposed to come next week. I was going to tell you before it did. I wasn't going to... Friday, he said again, not accusing, just absorbing the size of it. Okay. Logan, I need to think. Okay. I'll call you later. Okay, she said, and she sounded like someone who had done the thing they believed they had to do and had not discovered that it felt the way they'd expected. He hung up. He stood in his kitchen. The coffee was cold in the cup beside him. From the hallway came the sound of Lily's alarm going off. The one shaped like a small robot that played a xylophone melody she'd chosen herself and already half-hated. And then the sound of her turning it off, and then silence, and then the specific thumping shuffle of 8-year-old feet on the hallway floor. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her hair was sideways, and her pajamas had a picture of a whale on them. She looked at her father the way she looked at things she was assessing before committing to a reaction. "You look weird," she said. "Good morning to you, too." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Go get dressed." She studied him for another moment with that unnerving perceptiveness of hers, the quality she'd had since she was small, of knowing when adults were saying one thing and meaning another. Then she went down the hall without pushing it, which was either trust or tactical patience. And with Lily, it was usually both. He didn't call back that day. He meant to. He spent the day moving through work and school, pickup and dinner and Lily's homework, with the call sitting in the back of his mind like a task he kept putting off because he didn't know yet what he was going to say. He didn't have the speech. He didn't have the organized and clear-eyed thing that this moment seemed to require. What he had was the knowledge that she was leaving in 2 days and that the house already felt different, knowing that already felt subtly wrong in the specific way that spaces feel wrong when the person who belongs in them is about to stop being there. He'd felt that feeling before. He knew exactly what it was. After Lily was in bed, he sat on the couch in the quiet and let himself feel it without trying to organize it into something manageable. The scale of what he'd been taking for granted arrived with the specific force of things that have been true for a long time and have only just been understood. 6 years of her showing up. 6 years of the house being the right size when she was in it. 6 years of Lily assuming, without ever articulating the assumption, that Ava was simply part of the permanent structure of their life. He thought about Lily asking, "Is Ava coming over this week?" with the same practical certainty as asking whether they had milk. He thought about what it would feel like to have to answer that question differently. He thought about Ava sitting in her apartment on the 32nd floor right now, and whether she was packing or sitting with a glass of wine, or working late the way she always did when she was trying not to think about something, and whether she had any idea what he was actually feeling. And then he thought about something that had been sitting at the edge of his awareness since Sunday, since the phone call, since the specific moment she'd said, "I can't make a decision about my life that hinges on whether Logan Hayes works something out." And he thought about the fact that she was right. She was completely right. And also that he had been sitting in the middle of the answer for 3 weeks without saying it out loud. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Ava. He texted his mother instead. "Can you take Lily tomorrow after school? I need Friday morning free." His mother replied in under a minute, "Yes, is everything all right?" He thought about this for a moment. Then he wrote, "Working on it." She sent back a single word, "Good." He set the phone down. The house was quiet. The compass was on the end table where he'd put it after the Wednesday dinner, where it had stayed because Lily kept forgetting to bring it back to her room. And the needle pointed north in the lamplight, steady and uncomplicated, exactly as it was supposed to. He looked at it for a long time. He still didn't have a speech. He still didn't have the perfectly formed thing. But somewhere in the last hour, the fear that had been sitting underneath everything, the fear that wanting more was how you broke what you already had, had shifted in some critical way, because he had sat with it fully enough to see what was actually on the other side of it. What was on the other side of it was Ava Sinclair, getting on a plane on Friday morning. And Logan Hayes, for the first time in 3 weeks, was completely certain about something. He didn't sleep much that night either, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the one after the gala. That night had been disorienting. The specific dislocation of having your map of something redrawn without warning. This night was different. This was the sleeplessness of a man who had made a decision and was now living in the hours before he got to act on it. The specific restless energy of knowing what you were going to do and having no choice but to wait for the time to do it. He was up at 5:30. He made coffee. He packed Lily's bag for his mother's and set it by the door, then went down the hall and stood in Lily's doorway for a minute, the way he sometimes did in the early morning. Not to check on her, just to look. She was on her side with one arm hanging off the mattress, completely out, her hair spread across the pillow in a dark fan, the compass on the nightstand beside her because she'd apparently moved it back from the end table sometime in the last few days without telling him. She'd taken ownership of it with the same quiet certainty she brought to everything she'd decided was hers. He stood there and thought about what it meant to be responsible for someone that completely. How it changed the calculus of every decision, made you slower and more careful than you'd been before, made you weigh things in a different unit of measurement. He'd used Lily, without meaning to, as a reason to stay still, as if movement in his own life was inherently dangerous to her, as if wanting something for himself was a kind of negligence. He understood now that this was wrong, not cruel, not stupid, just wrong. Lily didn't need him to stop being a person. Lily needed him to show her what it looked like when a person chose well. He went back to the kitchen and drank his coffee and watched the city get light. Lily woke at 7 and accepted the news that she was going to her grandmother's after school with the equanimity of someone who had already categorized her grandmother's house as a reliable secondary habitat. She ate her cereal and monitored her compass and delivered a 7-minute briefing on the geopolitical situation of her classroom, in which Priya had apparently apologized about the glitter incident, but in a way that Lily considered technically complete but emotionally insufficient. "Did you accept the apology?" Logan asked. "Yes, but I want her to know I noticed." There's a fine line between accountability and holding a grudge. Lily considered this. "I'm not holding a grudge. I'm maintaining accurate records." He drove her to school, kissed the top of her head at the door, watched her walk in with the compass in her jacket pocket, even though he'd specifically said it should stay home. He waited until she was inside before he allowed himself to think about the next 3 hours. He drove back. He showered and changed. He checked Ava's flight. It was departing from Harlow International at 10:40, which meant she would need to be there by 8:30 at the latest. It was 7:15 now. He was already behind. He found his keys and his jacket and he left. The thing nobody tells you about rush hour traffic when you're trying to get somewhere that actually matters is that it is exactly as bad as it always is, and your urgency has zero effect on it. Logan sat on the Westfield connector for 11 minutes without moving while a fender bender 2 exits ahead sorted itself out, and he used those 11 minutes to run through every version of what he was going to say, none of which felt adequate. He wasn't good at speeches. He had never been the kind of man who could stand in front of someone and produce exactly the right words in exactly the right order, and he had spent too much of the last 3 weeks trying to find the perfect formulation, clear enough to mean something, careful enough not to promise more than he could deliver. And what he'd found was that the perfect formulation didn't exist, and he was going to have to show up anyway. He texted Ava from the standstill. "Are you still home?" The red receipt appeared almost immediately. Then 3 dots. Then they stopped. Then, Logan. Just his name. Not a question, not an answer, just his name in a text message that somehow contained an entire conversation. He wrote, "Don't leave yet. I'm coming." The 3 dots again. Then, "You don't have to do this." He looked at the stopped traffic ahead of him. He looked at the time. He wrote, "I know I don't have to. That's not why I'm doing it." She didn't respond to that. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice, and then nothing, which he decided to interpret as her still being home because the alternative was not something he was willing to deal with until he had actual evidence. Traffic moved. He moved with it. Night. The lobby of Ava's building was all glass and stone, and the concierge knew him by now. 3 years of enough visits that his face had become a recognized quantity. The man at the desk glanced up, and Logan said 32 without stopping, and the man either nodded or he didn't, and Logan was already at the elevator. He knocked on her door at 8:03. She opened it almost immediately, which meant she'd been standing somewhere near it. She was dressed for travel, dark slacks, a simple black top, practical flats, her hair up. Behind her he could see 2 suitcases near the entry, carry-on sized, which surprised him, and then he remembered that she'd be setting up a Singapore office over 3 years, not 3 weeks, which meant things would be shipped, which meant these 2 bags were just the beginning of her leaving. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him at the gala when he'd found the box, with that quality of a person who is trying very hard to keep their face doing the right thing while something complicated is happening underneath it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "You already said that." "I mean it." "So do I." He stood in the doorway. He wasn't sure if he was invited in yet, and he wasn't going to assume. "Can I?" She stepped back. He came in. The penthouse felt different with the suitcases there. He didn't know how to explain it. The space was the same, the furniture was the same, the city through the windows was the same, but 2 packed bags near the door had a way of reclassifying everything around them, making everything feel provisional. She stood with her arms crossed, not closed off, just holding herself. He had seen her do that before, in moments of stress, in the handful of times in 6 years she'd let him see her rattled. It was the posture of a person who was keeping it together and knew it. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "The expansion has been in discussion for 2 years. My potential involvement has been on the table for—" "Not the expansion, Ava. How long have you been planning to use it as the exit?" She looked away, toward the window. The city in the early morning light was pale and clear, the kind of morning that made everything look more decisive than it was. "Since the night of the gala," she said. He'd known that. He'd suspected it from the moment he'd read the news alert, and now hearing it confirmed had a weight to it that was different from suspicion. She had gone home from the night he'd found the box, from the night she'd told him everything, and instead of sleeping, she had sat with the reality of what she'd done, made herself completely known, removed every protection, handed him something breakable, and she had been afraid. Not of him, of what came next, of the waiting, of the not knowing, of being in love with someone who might figure out that what he felt wasn't the same thing. And so she had found the exit. He understood this. He understood it because he knew her, because 6 years of paying attention added up to a fairly complete map of how Ava Sinclair handled the things she was afraid of, and what she did was she made contingency plans. She was the most prepared person he'd ever met in his life. She didn't walk into rooms without knowing where the exits were. The problem was that some exits shouldn't be used. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Logan, you don't—" "Ava." His voice was quiet and level, and she stopped. "Please let me say this." She looked at him. She nodded once. He thought about the version of himself that would have rehearsed this, that would have had the structured and complete thing ready. He thought about all the careful weeks. He said, without having exactly planned to say it this way, "I have spent 6 years building my life around my daughter and my work and the very specific project of not wanting anything I wasn't sure I could keep, and I convinced myself that was wisdom, and it was, for a while. And then somewhere in there it became something else. It became a way of not looking at things I was afraid to see." She was very still. "I looked at them," he said. "I looked at all of them. And what I found, what I keep finding, every time I stop being careful long enough to just be honest, is you. 6 years of you being the person I called first, and the person I wanted in the room, and the person my daughter draws into every picture she makes of us." He stopped. He made himself continue. "I'm not standing here with some perfect declaration. I don't have that. I'm standing here with the specific and honest truth that I don't want you to get on that plane, and not because I'm afraid of losing a friend, though I am, but because when I imagine the next 3 years without you in them, the thing I feel isn't loneliness. It's loss. And those are different." The room was quiet. Ava was looking at him with an expression he had never quite seen on her before. Something that was past the careful composure, past the reserves. something that had simply given up on being managed. That's not... She stopped. Her voice had gone rough at the edges in a way she clearly hadn't planned for. You can't say something like that and expect me to know what to do with it. I know. Logan, I have a car coming in 40 minutes. I have a flight. The board has made a public announcement. I can't just... I'm not asking you to make a decision in the next 40 minutes. I'm asking you to not get on that plane today without knowing what I actually feel. And what do you actually feel? He looked at her. I love you. He said it the way she'd said the other thing, weeks ago in this same apartment, the night of the storm. Simply, without the architecture of a big moment around it, without the delivery that turns a true thing into a performance. Just the fact of it, placed in the room between them. She closed her eyes. I love you the way I love Lily, he said, which is to say, it's not something I decided, and it's not something I could undo even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. And I know that is not a small thing to put on you, and I know you've been carrying something like it for 2 years on your own, and I'm sorry it took me this long to catch up. Logan, I'm not asking you to fix your whole plan in the next 40 minutes. I'm asking you to give me a conversation, a real one. Not through texts, not around Lily, not while one of us has a car on the way. I'm asking you to delay the flight or cancel the car or do whatever you need to do and sit down with me and talk about this like two people who are trying to figure out something real. She opened her eyes. They were bright in a way that was not quite tears but was adjacent to them, the look of someone holding back a tide that had been building for a while. I can change the flight to tomorrow, she said slowly. Okay. That is not me saying yes to everything you just said. I know. I need to think. She pressed her hand briefly against her mouth. It was the most unguarded gesture he'd ever seen from her, completely unplanned, something getting through the surface before she could stop it. You have extremely bad timing. I know that too. 3 weeks. I gave you 3 weeks. I know. And you show up at 8 in the morning the day of my flight. I know. I'm sorry about the timing. I'm not sorry I came. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city went about its business. A helicopter somewhere in the middle distance. The low, constant murmur of traffic 40 floors down. A cloud moving across the early sun and changing the light in the room by 3 degrees. Change the flight, he said. Call the car off. I'll get us coffee from the place on the corner, the one you liked before they changed the cups. And you can yell at me for the timing, and then we can actually talk. She stared at him. The cups are smaller now. I've mentioned this to you. Multiple times. It's not the same coffee experience. I know, I'll still get it. Something shifted in her face. The very beginnings of something that was not yet resolved, not yet whole, but that was moving in a direction that had been a long time coming. You'll have to deal with me being angry, she said. About the cups? About all of it. The timing. The 3 weeks. The news alert. She said the last 2 words with a specific flatness that communicated exactly how that had landed. I found out from a news alert that my best friend knew I was leaving. That's fair. I'm serious, Logan. I'm not going to be gracious about all of this immediately. I'm not asking for gracious. I'm asking for honest. She looked at him for another long beat. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone and looked at the screen, and he watched her make the call. To the car service first, brief and professional, cancellation with an apology for the late notice. Then to her executive assistant, who picked up on the first ring because her executive assistant picked up on the first ring at all hours as a matter of professional identity. And Ava said, I need you to move the Singapore departure. Push everything 24 hours. Yes, I know. Tell them it's my call. A pause. Because it is. Thank you. She hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand in her travel clothes with 2 suitcases behind her, and she looked at Logan, and some part of him that had been braced since Thursday morning released like a cable that had been under load. Coffee, she said. Coffee, he agreed, and I want a croissant. Done. And I want it on record that this is extremely inconvenient. Noted. And that I'm still... She stopped. Something went through her face. I'm still scared, Logan. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. He looked at her, at the specific and particular face of Ava Sinclair being genuinely honest about something that frightened her, which was not something she gave out freely or easily, which was something she'd given him across 6 years in small and carefully rationed amounts. He understood what it cost her. He had always understood that, even before he'd understood everything else. "Me too," he said. She nodded once, slowly, like an acknowledgement between two people who have decided to be honest about something difficult and are still working out what that means. "Okay," she said. He went downstairs. He walked to the coffee shop on the corner, the one with the smaller cups that she'd never forgiven, and he bought 2 coffees and 2 croissants, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the clear morning air and let himself feel the full size of what had just happened. Not the resolution of it, not the end of it, because they weren't there yet, and he knew it. There were things to say and things to work out, and real conversations ahead that wouldn't be easy, because nothing real ever was, and Ava was going to be angry about some of it, and he was going to handle that imperfectly, and they were going to have to build this thing from the actual materials of who they were, which were imperfect materials in the way all real materials were. But she was upstairs. She had canceled the car and changed the flight, and she was upstairs. He walked back to the building. He rode the elevator to 32. She opened the door before he could knock because she'd been watching for him, probably, or had heard the elevator, or both, and he came in and handed her the coffee, and she looked at the cup and looked at him and said, "It really is smaller. It really is. This is a genuine loss. A tragedy," he agreed. "I'm not being sarcastic." "I know you're not." She held the cup with both hands and looked at him, and the morning light came through the windows and lay across the floor between them, and the suitcases were still by the door, still packed, still representing a version of events that had been interrupted rather than abandoned. Because nothing was resolved yet. Not really, and they both knew it. But they were no longer the most important objects in the room. "Start talking," Ava said. So he did. They talked for 4 hours. Not the kind of talking that looks clean in retrospect, not the conversation that moves in a straight line from problem to resolution with appropriate pauses for emotional beats. The real kind. The kind that doubles back and gets stuck and goes sideways into things that have been waiting for years to be said, and where one person says something honest and the other person sits with it for a full minute before responding, and where there are stretches of silence that aren't comfortable exactly, but are necessary. The way a bone that healed wrong sometimes needs to be broken again before it can set right. Ava sat in the armchair. Logan sat on the couch across from her. The coffee went cold. Neither of them finished the croissant. Outside the windows, the morning advanced without them. The city going through its ordinary Friday with no awareness of the 2 people on the 32nd floor trying to figure out something that should have been figured out years ago and wasn't, because they'd both been too careful in their different ways, and careful had its costs. She was angry. She had told him she would be, and she didn't perform it. She wasn't loud about it. She wasn't theatrical, which was not Ava's way. She was precise about it. She told him exactly what the 3 weeks had been like from her side, what it had felt like to tell him the most unguarded thing she'd ever told anyone, and then go home and wait, and keep waiting, and show up on Wednesdays and sit on his couch and be normal while not knowing, and watch him be careful and considered while she was sitting with something that didn't have a careful and considered setting. "I'm not built the way you are," she said. I don't do things halfway. I never have. And this was the one area of my life where I was making myself do it halfway, deliberately, because I thought it was the right thing. And it cost me something. I know. I don't think you do completely. I think you know it intellectually." "You're right," he said. "I don't know it the way you lived it. I'm sorry." She looked at him when he said that. Not suspicious of the apology, just reading it, checking its weight the way she checked everything. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy something, because she looked away again, and some of the precision in her posture softened by a degree. "What I need to understand," she said, "is whether this is about not wanting to lose me or about actually wanting something different, because those are not the same thing, and I need you to know the difference." It was the right question. He had known she would ask it, had been sitting with it since the previous night, since the compass on the end table and the decision in the dark. He didn't answer right away because he wanted to answer it correctly, not quickly. When I saw you at that bar with Marcus Hale, he said finally, what I felt was not the fear of losing a friend. I know what that feels like, and it's not the same. What I felt was, he stopped. He tried to find the honest word rather than the impressive one. Territorial, which is not a flattering thing to admit. No, she agreed. And when you told me you were leaving, what I felt was not the grief of losing someone important to me, although that was in there. What I felt was the bottom falling out, like something structural had given way. He looked at her. I've been in love with you for longer than I've known it. I think you probably understood that before I did. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe, she said, but maybe doesn't count. Knowing counts. I know. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. She looked at him for a long time, the kind of looking that is actually an assessment, that is working through something complicated and not pretending otherwise. He held it. He didn't try to fill it with more words or make it easier with a gesture. He just sat there and let her look, because she had earned the right to take whatever time she needed, and because he understood now that the most important thing he could do in this room was not to be impressive or articulate, but just to be present and honest and not flinch. I have a board, she said at last. I know. I have a public announcement. I have a team in Singapore that's been briefed on my arrival. I have a 3-year plan that 30 people have spent 4 months building. I know all of that. I can't just erase it because you showed up with smaller cup coffee. I'm not asking you to erase anything. I'm asking you to look at what you actually want. Not what you planned because you were protecting yourself. What you actually want. She stood up. She walked to the window, not dramatically, just needing to move, needing a few feet of distance to think from. He watched her stand there, her back to him, looking out at the city. He had looked at her like this 100 times, and he was only now fully admitting to himself that he had always looked at her this way, with a kind of attention that was not the attention you gave a friend. I want the expansion, she said, to the window. That part is true. It's a real opportunity, and I believe in it, and I built the strategy myself. That's not the part I fabricated. Okay. What I fabricated was the urgency, the timeline. I pushed the board for a faster announcement than we'd planned because I wanted it locked before I could talk myself out of it. Or before I said something. She turned around. Yes, she said. Or before you said something. He stood up. Not moving toward her, just standing, both of them on their feet now in the morning light. Then here's what I think, he said. I think you're good enough at your job that the Singapore expansion will succeed with you leading it from here for the first 6 months and making 2 or 3 extended trips. I think you know that, and your board knows that, because you're the one who knows the strategy, and the strategy doesn't require you to be physically present for every step of it. I think you put full relocation on the table because you were trying to create maximum distance, not because it was operationally necessary. She stared at him. Am I wrong? He asked. A very long pause. You're not wrong, she said, with a specific reluctance that was itself a kind of honesty. Then talk to your board. Not today, not this minute, but before tomorrow's flight. He paused. Or don't. I'm not trying to control what you do with your company. I'm just saying I don't think you have to choose between the expansion and this. I think that's a false choice you built because you needed an exit, and I understand why you needed it, and I'm asking you to reconsider whether you still do. She looked at him for a long time after that. The kind of silence that was not empty but full of the weight of the last 3 weeks and the 6 years before them, and the specific moment at the antique market when a stranger had said something harmless and the world had begun, quietly and irreversibly, to shift. I'm going to need more coffee, she said, from a place with normal-sized cups. I'll find one. And I need you to call Lily, because if I'm going to make any decisions today, I need all the relevant parties in the room. He looked at her. She's at my mother's. I know where she is. Call her. His mother brought Lily at noon. She came in the way she always came into Ava's building, with the confidence of someone who had been welcomed here enough times to have stopped thinking of it as someone else's space. She was still in her school clothes, backpack on, compass in her jacket pocket where it lived now like a permanent resident. She stopped just inside the door and looked at Ava and looked at her father and did the things she did. The rapid quiet assessment, the reading of the room's emotional weather. She was 8 years old, and she was better at this than most adults Logan knew. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked. "We're working on it," Logan said. Lily considered this. She looked at Ava specifically. Ava was standing near the kitchen, and whatever had been happening in the 4 hours before this moment had left something visible on her face. Not distress, but the look of a person who has been feeling things at full volume for a while, which was a look Ava didn't usually let anyone see. Lily walked across the room and stood in front of her. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the compass and held it out, flat on her palm, the way you offer something to someone who needs it more than you do. Ava looked down at the compass. She looked at Lily. "You can hold it," Lily said. "It helps." Ava took it. She looked at the needle for a moment, the small, settled point of it, and her face did something that she didn't control, something that moved through it briefly and completely before she steadied, and she crouched down to Lily's level and said very quietly, "Thank you." "You're not leaving, right?" Lily asked. Not accusatory, not dramatic, just direct. The way Lily was about the things that mattered to her. Clear and honest, and without the protective layering that adults built up over decades of learning that directness could hurt. Ava looked at her. Then she looked at Logan. Then she looked back at Lily. "I don't want to leave," Ava said. "I'm trying to figure out how not to." Lily nodded. She seemed to find this satisfactory, not as a complete answer, but as an honest one, which was enough. She took her backpack off and went to the couch and got the book she'd been reading the last time she was here, the one about the girl who sailed around the world, which was still on the side table where she'd left it because Ava had not moved it, had left it there for whenever Lily came back. Logan's mother, who had been standing near the door through all of this with the particular quality of a woman who understood when her presence was background and when it was needed, caught Logan's eye and tilted her head toward the door. He walked over. "You're staying?" she said quietly. "We're figuring it out." She looked at him for a moment with the 60-year-old face of someone who had watched him make avoidable mistakes, and unavoidable ones, and had opinions about the difference. "Don't overthink it," she said. "You've been overthinking it for 6 years. I know. I'm aware you know." She glanced across the room at Ava, who was still holding the compass, looking at the needle. "She's good, Logan. She's good for both of you. Don't make her prove it in triplicate." He kissed his mother's cheek. She left. The door closed, and it was the three of them, and the room settled into something that was not resolved, but was warm. The way a room feels when the people who belong in it are all present. Ava called her board chair at 2 in the afternoon. She did it from the second office, door closed, while Logan sat in the living room with Lily, who was reading her book and periodically asking him questions about sailing that he couldn't answer. He sat there and listened to the closed door and the faint sound of Ava's voice on the other side of it. Not the words, just the tone, which he knew well enough to read from 3 rooms away. Professional, clear. Not apologetic, because Ava never apologized for decisions from a place of weakness, but direct. The way she was about everything that mattered to her. She was in there for 45 minutes. Lily fell asleep somewhere around minute 30, the book sliding down to her chest, the compass still on the cushion beside her because she'd retrieved it from Ava before settling in. Logan sat and looked at his daughter sleeping and thought about the last 6 years in the way you think about things after a long weight has been lifted. Not with grief, not with regret exactly, but with the clear-eyed honesty of being able to see the full shape of something now that you weren't standing in the middle of it anymore. He had been so afraid. That was the honest bottom of it. Not of Ava. Not of love in the abstract. Afraid of the specific arithmetic of loss. That wanting something was the first step toward having it taken. That the people who showed up reliably in your life had a way of eventually not showing up. And that if you didn't need them too much, you couldn't be devastated when they went. He had learned this at 26 when Lily's mother had handed him a 6-month-old daughter and told him she wasn't built for the life they'd made together and left. And he had been very careful after that. He had built something stable, a good life, a real one, a life where Lily had everything she needed and he had enough. And he had sat inside that enough for 6 years and called it wisdom, when some of it was, in fact, just fear wearing wisdom's clothes. The office door opened. Ava came out. She stopped in the middle of the living room and looked at Lily sleeping, and then looked at Logan, and she had the particular expression of someone who has just done something irreversible and is sitting with the reality of that. "Well," she said. "Well," he said, "the relocation is on hold. The expansion proceeds on the original timeline with remote leadership and 2 site visits in the first year." She paused. "Richard, my board chair, he said he was wondering when I'd come to my senses." "He knew?" "Apparently my entire board has been aware for some time that I was running an unnecessary amount of my life from this city for reasons that weren't strictly professional." She looked at him with a specific dryness. "I may not have been as subtle as I thought. To be fair, you were very subtle with me. You're not the most observant person. That's fair." She sat down in the armchair across from him. She leaned back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at her hands, then at Lily, who was deeply asleep in the way of children who had been somewhere emotionally significant and had simply run out of resources. "I'm still angry," Ava said. "I know. Not at you right now. At the situation. At the time." She exhaled. 2 years, Logan. I carried that for 2 years. "I know. I'm sorry." "I know you are." She looked at him. "I'm not going to hold it over you. I don't want to do this with some kind of score that needs to be settled. I just need you to understand the weight of it." "I understand. And I need you to know that this isn't me deciding everything is fine and simple now. I need this to be real. I've had enough of careful and managed. If we're going to be something, it needs to be something I can actually count on." "That's all I want to give you," he said. "I know I have a track record of late arrivals." "You do." "I got here this time." She looked at him for a long beat. Something settled in her face, slowly, the way the water settles after something has disturbed it. Not immediately calm, but moving toward it, the surface finding its level. "You did," she said. "Pasek." They told Lily at dinner. Not with a formal announcement, not with the assembled gravity of a significant conversation. They told her the way you tell a child something true when the child is already sitting at the kitchen table eating pasta and has her compass next to her plate and is describing in detail the navigation techniques she's been reading about. Ava said, "I'm not going to Singapore." Lily stopped mid-sentence. She looked at Ava. She looked at her father. She looked at the compass. "Because of us?" she asked. Logan said, "Because she wants to stay." Lily thought about this for exactly the amount of time she needed to think about it, and not a second longer. "Good," she said, and picked up her fork again. "I was going to give you the compass if you left, so you'd be able to find your way back." Ava pressed her lips together. Logan looked at his plate because if he looked at anything else, he was not going to hold it together. "That was the plan?" Ava asked. "I thought about it at school," Lily said matter-of-factly. "It seemed logical, but now I don't have to." She set the compass more precisely beside her plate. "I want to keep it." "Keep it," Ava said. "I know." Lily looked at her with the full seriousness she reserved for important things. "Are you going to live here now?" A pause. Logan looked at Ava. Ava looked at Lily. "We're figuring that part out," Ava said. "Okay." Lily seemed to find this acceptable. "But you'll be around." "Yes," Ava said. "I'll be around." "Then that's the main thing." Lily ate her pasta. "The details can get worked out." Logan looked across the table at the 8-year-old who was apparently more emotionally intelligent than both of them combined, and he thought about something he'd read once, that children didn't need you to be perfect. They needed you to be present and honest. He had tried for 6 years to be both of those things for Lily. He had not, until very recently, understood that he needed to apply the same standard to himself. The weeks that followed were not a montage. They were specific and sometimes difficult and occasionally awkward, in the way that new things are awkward when they are being built from real materials by real people. There was a dinner in the 3rd week where Logan said the wrong thing about the board situation, and Ava went quiet in the particular way that meant something had landed badly, and they talked through it later, not perfectly, but honestly, which was better than perfectly. There was a Saturday at the antique market, because they went back, because Lily asked to, because the compass had become a kind of recurring reference in the story of the three of them, where Logan held Ava's hand for the first time without either of them making a production of it, just his hand and hers, walking through the stalls, and Lily looked down at their hands and looked up at the vendor tables with the expression of someone whose plans had been confirmed. There were arguments, small ones and one medium-sized one about Ava's work hours, and what sustainable looked like for someone who had been running at 110% for her entire career and was now attempting to recalibrate. There were evenings that were easy and evenings that required effort, and the gradual, imperfect construction of something that was not the idealized version of what two people can be to each other, but was the real version, which was better because the real version could hold weight. Ava moved some things to the house on a Tuesday in October. Not all of her things. Not a declaration. Just the practical migration of someone who was spending enough time somewhere that having a drawer in a section of the closet and her specific brand of coffee in the kitchen made sense. Lily supervised this process with an organizational interest that Logan suspected had something to do with the compass and a general philosophy about optimal placement of items. "You can have the shelf," Lily told Ava, pointing at the one in the hallway. "But the top one is mine." "What's on the top one?" "My drawings and the compass when I'm not carrying it, and a rock I found at Sutter Lake that is probably just a rock but might be something interesting." "I'll take the bottom shelf," Ava said. "Good call," Lily said, and went back to her room. The Singapore expansion launched on schedule in January. Ava ran it from the city for the first 4 months through video calls and detailed documentation and a site director named Clara, whom she'd promoted specifically for the role, and who was, by every measurable standard, handling the operational side with the kind of competence that made Ava's physical presence optional rather than required. The board was satisfied. The numbers were good. Richard, the board chair, sent Ava a message in February that said simply, "Told you so." She showed it to Logan, and he laughed, and she pretended she wasn't pleased about it. She made the first site visit in March, 12 days in Singapore, the longest she'd been away from the city since everything had changed. Logan drove her to the airport. They stood at the departures entrance, which had its own specific weight given the last time they'd been in an airport together, and Lily, who had insisted on coming, who had woken up at 5:30 voluntarily for the occasion, stood between them with the compass in her pocket. "North is that way," Lily told Ava, pointing roughly in the direction she'd decided Singapore was. "I'll keep it in mind. The compass doesn't work on planes, metal, and altitude. I looked it up. I'll navigate by stars." Lily considered this. "You don't know how to do that." "I'll figure it out." Logan kissed Ava at the departures entrance in the early morning with Lily standing beside them, and Lily made a face that was approximately 60% theatrical and 40% something she was trying to hide that was closer to satisfaction. Ava came back in 12 days, as planned. She came through arrivals with her carry-on and her laptop bag, and the specific expression of someone who was tired from traveling and glad to be home. And Lily was there with a sign she'd made at school with markers and a moderate amount of glitter which read, "Welcome back, Ava," with a drawing of a compass in the corner and 3 people underneath it holding hands. Ava saw the sign and stopped walking. Logan watched her stand there in the arrivals hall, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of people and luggage and reunions happening on all sides, and he watched something move through her face that had no single name, something that was relief and recognition, and the particular emotion of arriving somewhere you hadn't known was home until you were already in it. She looked at the sign. She looked at Lily, who was holding it up with both hands, and the expression of someone who was trying to be dignified about their own excellent craftsmanship. She looked at Logan. "The glitter was my idea," Lily said. "I know it was. Priya helped with the letters. We're better now." "I'm glad." Lily lowered the sign. She looked at Ava with the directness she always brought to the things that mattered to her. "You came back," she said. Not surprised, just noting the confirmation of something she'd already believed. "I said I would," Ava told her. "I know." Lily took her hand, practical and complete, the way she'd taken it at birthday parties and school plays and the camping trip she didn't know Ava had driven 3 hours to, briefly, quietly witness. "I just like it when things are true." In the spring, they renovated the backyard. It was Lily's idea originally. She wanted a garden, specifically a garden with things that could be used for navigation purposes, which turned out to mean sunflowers because they tracked the sun and moss because it grew on the north side of things. Logan said yes to the sunflowers and told her the moss thing was more complicated than she thought, and Ava said they could try anyway and see what happened, which was generally her approach to most things. They spent 3 consecutive Saturdays on it. Logan built the raised beds, which he did imperfectly because he measured wrong twice and had to recut lumber, and Ava ran the planting with the same specific energy she brought to strategic planning, and Lily narrated the entire process in a running commentary that drew equally on her gardening research and her opinions about the aesthetic decisions her father was making. On the last Saturday, they were sitting on the back steps, the ones that still needed painting, that had never gotten painted, that at this point were simply a permanent feature of the yard rather than a project. And Lily was inside getting lemonade, and Logan looked at the raised beds and the partially planted garden and felt something that took him a moment to identify because it was simple enough to be disorienting. He was happy. Not the careful provisional version of happy that he'd been operating with for most of 6 years. The happiness of a man who was managing things well and knew it, and was grateful but was also always somewhere running the risk assessment on what came next. This was different. This was the kind of happy that doesn't carry an asterisk, the kind you stop noticing as a specific condition because it's become the general weather. Ava was beside him on the step with her hands around a glass of water, and the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in spring, making everything look like it had been slightly color-corrected. And the compass was on the step between them because Lily had set it there when she went inside and told them not to move it. "What are you thinking?" Ava asked. "Nothing specific." "You're making the face." "What face?" "The one where you're actually thinking about something and claiming you're not." He looked at her. "I was thinking about how long it took us to get here." "Hmm? Do you think about that? How long it took?" She considered this in the way she considered things that deserved real consideration. "Sometimes," she said, "but not the way you might think. I'm not—" She turned the glass in her hands. "I spent a long time being angry at the time. 2 years of carrying something alone, and then 3 weeks of all of that. And somewhere in the last few months I stopped being angry about the time and started being glad it was this way instead of not at all." She looked at him. "You can get stuck grieving the version that could have been better, or you can pay attention to the version that actually is." He sat with that. "That's a very mature perspective," he said. "I've been working on it." "How's it going?" "Inconsistently." She leaned her shoulder into his. "Ask me on a harder day." Lily came back with 3 glasses of lemonade, managing them with significant concentration and the specific gait of a person trying very hard not to spill. She made it to the steps without incident, distributed the glasses with ceremony, and then sat on the step below them and looked at the garden. "The sunflowers are going to need water every day," she said. "I know," Logan said. "I'm putting it in my schedule." "You have a schedule?" "I have a system." She picked up the compass and pointed it at the raised beds. "They should be getting good light, east-facing. I planned it correctly." "You planned it correctly," Ava confirmed. Lily nodded, satisfied. She set the compass down and drank her lemonade and looked at the garden, and the afternoon went on in the specific and unhurried way of Saturday afternoons that don't have anything they need to be. And the 3 of them sat on the unpainted steps and talked about nothing particular and some things that mattered, and the difference between a garden you planned and a garden you tended, which was something they were all, in their different ways, beginning to understand. There is a version of this story that is about a man finally opening his eyes. There is another version where it's about a woman who loved someone quietly for 2 years without breaking. Both versions are true, and neither of them is the full thing. The full thing is messier and harder and more human than either of those. It is 2 people who were afraid for reasons that made complete sense given their history, doing the imperfect work of choosing each other across a series of ordinary moments. A market on a Saturday morning, a box of photographs in an apartment during a storm, a back step with a glass of lemonade, the ongoing, unfinished project of a garden that may or may not produce navigable moss. Logan Hayes, who had spent 6 years convinced that the careful life was the safe one, learned something about the nature of safety, that the things you protect by keeping them unchanged will protect you back exactly as much as you've grown, which is to say, not quite enough. That love is not something that happens to stable people after all the conditions are right. It is what you build the stability inside of. Ava Sinclair, who ran a billion-dollar company with a precision that left no room for error, who had managed the most complicated thing in her life, 2 years of loving someone who didn't know it. With the same controlled competence she brought to every other difficult problem, discovered the limits of control. That you can plan every contingency except the one where the person you built the plan around shows up at your door before the flight and says the thing you'd stopped allowing yourself to expect. That some things cannot be managed into existence. They can only be waited for, and chosen again. Lily, who was 8 years old and had a compass and a system and a theory about moss, understood something that the adults in her life had taken considerably longer to reach. That family was not about origin or obligation or the careful arrangement of appropriate people in appropriate roles. It was about who showed up. It was about who sat on the kitchen floor with you next to the broken birthday cake and laughed. It was about who saved photographs of ordinary days because ordinary was the thing worth keeping. The compass on the back step pointed north in the spring afternoon. It always did, scratched and imperfect, not the pristine one, the one Ava had spotted at the back of the vendor's table, the one she'd seen Lily's eyes go to before Lily had even known she wanted it. The right thing in the wrong condition, which turned out to be more than enough. The garden was unfinished. The steps still needed painting. Logan had measured wrong twice, and Ava had a harder day coming, the one she'd told him to ask her on, and Lily's moss experiment would turn out to be significantly more complicated than anticipated, and would require 3 separate research sessions, and a consultation with her grandmother, and ultimately produce 3 square inches of actual navigable moss in the corner of the garden bed, which she considered a definitive success. None of it was smooth. None of it was the version that happens in the story where everything resolves cleanly and the people become their best selves without the ongoing cost of trying. It was just real and continuing and theirs. And what had started as a stranger's harmless comment at a crowded antique market on an ordinary Saturday morning, "Ask the missus, she'll have an opinion," turned out to have been the most accurate thing said by anyone in the entire story. The woman always did get the final say. She always had. They just needed a little time to understand what that meant.